Hey everybody, my name is Dr. Michael Viega. Welcome. I would like to thank Dr. Kat McFerrin for inviting me to come talk with you and talk about my work as an arts-based researcher and the research that I have done. Um, yeah, I think just to start off, it's a little awkward for me to be speaking to my computer and not have any feedback from the audience, especially when talking about this topic where audience participation is so vital to dissemination of the research. So at any point, if you have any questions, contact me here at viegam@montclair.edu. I am an assistant professor of music and music therapy at Montclair State University, which is in New Jersey, outside of New York City. And yeah, really, um, arts-based research has been at the core of my work for a very long time now. So I won't go too much into what arts-based research is, just because I think the purpose, what I understand from Kat, what she would like me to do is present some of my work more concretely, or what I've done, and examples of what I've done. Unfortunately, I'm not in my office. Our semester hasn't started yet. If I was in my office, I would have all my technology, all my tech gear, and I could show you more concretely what I do that way. However, for another time, and if anybody would like supervision or support or guidance, we can always Zoom, and I can go over this stuff with you that way. So, right, arts-based research for me is not siloed from all the other um, research methodologies. However, it does stand on its own as its own creative way of thinking about design, about dissemination, about data generation and research. It's really where aesthetics and research come together and inform all other epistemologies of research. It's time. It's time for us as musicians, as artists, as creative thinkers to bring this to research more fully. And it doesn't matter what type of research that you do. I always like to give this example of Information is Beautiful, which is a great website, also a coffee table book of the art of data visualization. Why do bars, graphs, charts have to look like they're from 1940, 1950? Artists can inform, and it's through the aesthetics and that people actually engage with the work. So these can be seen as their own pieces of art. And when you add the data inside of it, it just enhances, but the aesthetic knowing of it already is there. So this is a great website where actually you can have access to a lot of public domain data, and go over and you could start to engage with the art. But look how art and how it's multimedia and how it's accessible and how it's open resource, right? I mean, this is where research should be going within the 21st century, certainly not staying with the same old pie charts. But the data should be interactive, it should be aesthetic, and it should be accessed in new and beautiful ways. So I like to start off with this example because a lot of people might think that arts-based research is only stems from the qualitative world, which is, or interpretivist world, which is not necessarily the case. Again, art informs all aspects of data. And no matter, and though I might not use that term data all the time, but it's the most useful term I have right now to talk about this. But it's a way of knowing across all epistemologies. Aesthetics does not just live in one way of knowing. So that said, if you do use art in your research, whether it's through this way by making more interesting, accessible, and aesthetic um, ways to display statistical data, or whether it's through, you know, creating artwork and poetry through phenomenological research, or you're doing arts-based research as its own thing, where the creative world and the artwork are the primary center of what's happening, not constructing meaning making. No matter what you do, representing art and um, contextualizing yourself as an artist and letting the readers or the people who are engaging with the research know how the art is to be used is central. All right. So let me start by talking about myself as an artist and why and what led up to my research. So yeah, let me just start by showing you myself as an awkward teenager. That's me with greasy hair and stubble and zits and all. You know, I, as a music therapist, my primary focus has been children and adolescents, and more than likely, um, it's because of how music played a role in my own teenage years. Me being a teenager, like a lot of teenagers who are searching for their identity, had massive self-esteem issues, you know, struggling with growing up in a divorced parental household without a father figure. And so I looked for father figures in my favorite artists. And in ninth grade, when I was, 14 years old probably, um, I took guitar lessons and quickly found autonomy and mastery pretty quickly, and that shaped my identity as I'm a guitar player, and then after that a songwriter, and it shaped who I was during those formative years and played a major role helping me move to the next stage in life, in which there's me at my first presentation, with my sideburns, 1990 sideburns down there. This is 1999, where I did my first presentation at a regional conference here in the States with working with teenagers. And it was always my strength to be able to do what I did as a teenager and bring it to other teenagers. And so music always provided me a strong sense of mastery, that this is something I am good at and this is something that I can bring to others. That led to one day having a PhD. This is me in 2013, and ultimately, uh, you know, kind of coming together in my dissertation, which was an arts-based research dissertation, in which I was studying the songs created by youth. I had a database, if you can call it that, songs, like over 250 to 300 songs that I had collected that over the years, that was, artifacts of therapeutic processes. And when it came time to do my dissertation, I knew that it was these songs that I wanted to study. I wanted to study them because I had deep relationships with them, not only with the people who wrote them, but with the songs themselves. The songs themselves lived inside of me. They weren't just artifacts. They were living entities that troubled me, that gave me a thrill, that made me cry, that I kept thinking about and going to. They became some of my preferred songs. I would sing them, driving in the car. I said, what do I do with these? And I knew that I didn't want to just do lyric analysis and add music analysis if they're two separate entities. Music is more holistic to me. Lyric analysis tells maybe one story, but without the story of the music, the meaning of the lyrics only tells partly of what's happening. If I just do the music analysis, again, I might be missing the lyric analysis. I knew that I could combine those and create meaning, but I needed to create art. These songs were inspiring me to create art. And I think that is, for me, one of the central aspects of being in arts-based research. When you engage in art, it makes you want to respond in art. When I go and see a concert and it moves me, and I don't create meaning from it, I'm not creating themes like an interpretivist researcher about what this means. I'm not giving it a 1 through 5 statistical score. I get moved by the artwork, and you can look at me and say, well, prove it. Is that true? Is that evidence that you gained something from it? You can't tell me that. I know it because of how it moved me. Tell me how to prove it. I'm not going to, that was my experience of it. And my response to it is to create art, is to inspire me to do something myself, to create in some way. Art's role is to inspire in a lot of ways. Sure, to get a conversation going is another thing, to inspire conversation, to make meaning, but also it might just inspire action. And part of my action as a musician and an artist is to create. So I knew that from these songs I wanted to create. And the songs that were created were songs based on people who identify with hip-hop culture. They were created on instruments like drum machines and samplers and some live instruments as well. But I wanted to work with the tools that in which the songs were created on, right? A lot of what you even see here, my guitar, my drum machines, my samplers. Those are how the original songs were created. I wanted to use those. So as I'm creating art, I'm also exploring how these songs were created. I'm exploring what the experiences of creating songs on these instruments are. And because it was created within that hip-hop and electronic music, remixing the songs felt like the natural, most obvious choice, both in response to my artistry and also the artistry of the people who created the songs in the first place. So in a lot of ways, this all just made sense. This all fit. This felt integrated. It felt whole. It combined. I never had to silo myself as I'm a researcher over here by day. By night, I'm a musician. At home, I'm a music lover and fan of music. I'm a therapist over here. No, all these things came together. And for me, that's the power of arts-based research. Is within the art, I can draw upon all the many aspects of self and bring it forward. And of course, I love bringing it forward now too. There's a picture of my son. It's a few years old now, but now watching my son go on his own path. And again, how we inspire each other through art, what we give and pass on, and how that creates other individual selves is possibly the greatest gift of art and of music. Look at that guy, handsome fella. Talking about my son. I give credit to myself, I guess. All right, I'll stop talking. This is the trouble with talking to a computer and not a live audience. I don't have the concentration for it. All right, let me get off that for a moment. So I've already said a lot. So let's get right to the concept album, Rising from the Ashes. This was my first piece of arts-based research that I did, that I completed. Now, I will give a link, and you have a link, to one of the first performances of this album, in which I did a live remix of this. But let me set you up on how it originally came about. So, I knew that I wanted to study these songs that were created by teenagers who had experienced extreme trauma, who identified with hip-hop culture, who came from limited resource communities, and music was an inherent natural resource, right? No formalized music training, yet people could do double, triple word entendre. They could, freestyle naturally in rhythm and in beat. They could naturally know how to use digital technology and create in very powerful ways. So, music, and especially digital technology, and especially primary music of hip hop and the art forms of hip hop became, the natural way that people communicated and responded. And I took on various roles as the therapist. I was very quickly they said, Music Mike, you're a producer, and and that role was one of a listening role and trying to take their artistry and give it a place to shine up front. Sometimes I was the engineer where I would help solve technical problems to make something happen. I remember one songwriter said, I want the snare drum to sound like water drumming. Well, okay, let's try to get that image. Let's try to create that sonic image for you. Sometimes I was their fan, just a witness, but more than a witness, a fan who deeply connected to the music. And to connect to the music was not just to say, I like what you're doing and I like what you wrote, but is to say, wow, I recognize that song within myself. And that's a powerful connection with songs. So, I started with that huge database. I focused on one area. Those songs are written across a lot of different settings. I focused primarily on the setting of a foster care child welfare program where a group of teenagers of all genders lived in various cottages, and usually court appointed or coming from a psychiatric facility. Each of them had 6 songwriting sessions. Some of them didn't make it. A lot of them would run away or get put back into the system. So, what ended up happening is I would listen to the songs and I would respond to them in different natural ways. Some songs that, again, challenged me, some songs that I said, oh, I love this one. I definitely want to explore this one. And what I would begin to do is I would start with a song. I would go into a space, a creative space, and I wanted to engage with the music in a way that felt natural to me. I wanted to listen first just in my body. Usually I'm just tapping my toes to a beat before I actually know what song is this. My body sometimes understands more than I do. Sometimes you all have experiences where you start tapping your feet to a beat, and then you say, ooh, I didn't know I was I don't like that song. Why was I dancing to that beat? Well, your body knows. Your ego got in the way there. Your body knows this is good for you. Get up and dance. So I wanted to do body listening first, which was a method of listening to the music that was embodied. I usually would lie down in a relaxed state and I would hit play and I would just allow my body to move in natural ways or sometimes freeze. I would listen to what my body needed in the moment. And I would listen this way. Usually the song I would listen to 3 or 4 times before something emerged. And something usually emerged that was a moment of the song, a breath, a musical phrase, a lyric, an image. Something came to me that I then was like, all right, now I'm going to take this I want to sample it. And now I'm going to play with it and improvise with it. Sometimes I needed to draw. Sometimes I needed to start writing the lyrics. I mean, each of the songs took me in different creative ways. But the basic thread is I would move from an embodied phase to a more reflexive phase, reflecting on some aspect of the song that was emerging. And then a product would come out that I could reflect on more. And then later I would do the lyric and music analysis. But it's the reflective phase that these remix songs emerged. And I would write a remix. I'd create a remix, and then I would go home and listen to it, and I would do 2 or 3 remixes, and I say, you know what? There's kind of an order here. This really flows well into this one. This really flows well into that. Wow, I got to now explore this song because I feel like this would come. And so my creative juices were really flowing. If any of you have written an album before and gone into the studio and record, you start writing songs and then you get a blackboard out and say, oh, what if we order them this way? We want to tell a story here. And so the idea of a concept album came forward because I wanted this concept album to kind of tell the story of these songs at different phases, different people, songwriters at different journeys, at different stages, developmentally over the course of this responses to extreme trauma in their life. And so what began to emerge was a story of people at different points of trauma recovery, and I was allowed to, had the honor to swim inside these songs to really get to know them. To honor these songs, not just as mere artifacts of therapy, but as, again, living, breathing, live entities of these people's experience. So what is a remix? A remix formally is remix culture is digital sampling culture, where you take an original sound source, usually of a song, you take sample components of the song, give it new musical components, and what happens is an element in the original song is explored and brought to life so that new meaning is created within the art form. My favorite remixes are things where are remixes where a new element of the original song comes alive and you go, wow, I never heard that in the original. That really gives depth or more meaning to the original source, or gives a new context that I didn't think about before. And that's really the beauty of remix culture. It honors the traditions of the past while bringing new information in the present to light. Now, that's kind of, there's the musical tradition of that. For me, in a therapy context, remixing was all about not only taking sampling from the original sound source, but it was about, I could take a feeling state that was emerging and use that as a way of gaining new meaning and sampling that. I could, as I was dancing to one song, I could start to go hut, hut. I could have the image of like a militaristic, something like a very militaristic march would come to me. So I would then start to repeat, going hut, 2, 3, 4, and I would sample myself doing that. So it was not only sampling from the original sound source, but sometimes I would sample my own thoughts, feelings, reactions, and responses. So I would do a lot of it. Sometimes I would sample a breath of someone entering into the lyrics, because for me in that moment, that breath was the preparation of them, and that felt so important to me in the moment. I would sample that breath, and I would play with that breath in the sampler until it turned into a beat, and I would allow that breath to become the primary beat of the whole remix. So you get it. Here I'm using my artistic ways of knowing to create new meaning. The whole purpose of arts-based research in a lot of ways is to use the framework, the lens of an artist, where works of art are also works of research. And it is really about the lens that an artist looks through. I could look at some of my most favorite albums through the lens of a researcher and say, wow, what did I learn about the world? What is the question that artist is exploring? So works of art become works of research. Works of research can be works of art. In this day and age, why make it such a binary? Why separate art and research? Okay, so back to Rising from the Ashes. The theme of Icarus came up a lot. After about 12 or so songs, I felt like the remixes I did, I felt like there was a really strong concept album that emerged. I named it Rising from the Ashes. And the concept album kind of goes into 3 stages. Now, what's a concept album? Well, we all know, let's see if I can find, of course, one of the most famous concept albums of all time, somewhere in this mess of records I have. I could really pull out any of these. I really don't want to waste your time too much, so I apologize, but this just came to me. Right? Pink Floyd's The Wall. Not as exciting pulling it out as I gave it credit for. But this is like a really clear cut example of a concept album where there's a kind of a clear story that unfolds throughout the whole thing. It goes in stages. You can almost visualize it into a movie, which a movie was made of it. Sometimes the concept albums are kind of clear cut and tell a clear theme throughout. Sometimes there are other concept albums that aren't as clear cut and don't follow that same linear narrative. I could think of a lot of different ones there, like Radiohead's Kid A, or Things Fall Apart by The Roots. These are albums that have clear concepts that maybe the songs don't tell a necessary narrative throughout. For me, there wasn't such a clear narrative lyrically as much as there is kind of sonically that we go through three different concrete phases. And stage one is three songs. It starts off with an epilogue of a songwriter who is at the very end phase. She's our journey. She's our guide during the whole thing. And then it moves into three different songs where these stages are going into hiding as a protection of vulnerability. It's the kind of that orphan archetype. It's the hard knock life, kind of little orphan Annie archetype, where there's distance between the adult world, the therapist world, and the songwriter world. From the teenage world to the adult world, there's issues of trust and there's issues of protecting vulnerability and a fear of exploitation. And so you actually hear my voice pretty prominently in this phase because I'm trying to imagine their world and while keeping the play container safe. Stage two, Down into the Labyrinth. These are songs and experiences. This is when we start going into the vulnerability. This is when we start getting into issues of the abuse they've experienced, of the trauma they've experienced. Really, stage one is a resource builder, because once we move into stage two, teenagers may not have the resources needed to actually explore these themes and these topics. And of course, we can move into it really easy in music, but as musicians, we better help provide the resources needed once we start moving into those topics. Stage three was kind of songs created about faith and of moving forward and of hope. And so I called that stage Loving Me and My Butterfly Wings. I believe I have this is like 90 seconds of all the remixes together. You can make it. Rising from the ashes. This is the epilogue. You can make it. Rising from the ashes. Rising from the ashes. We're in stage one.
Lost in my body, not really sure what's happening. Shaking, don't stop me. Awkward. Walk around trying to hide it. I'm going to protect it. If I feel I'm gonna fight it, yeah. I had it all in my body, things changed. Walking to my party, getting freaky on the ground. We took another round. Whose party? My party. Let's party. Whose party? My party. Let's party. I'm in my space. Watch me go. Going higher than I've been before. I'm Icarus, except I won't crash. Make one wish. This will last.
Now we're going into stage two. If you're following the hero's journey, this is 3 o'clock. things start getting a little strange. It's crossing the threshold.
I'm an emotional disaster. And my heart can't take it anymore. No, 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 no. I'm an emotional disaster. And my heart can't take it.
This is 6 o'clock. Death moving into rebirth. It's actually moving into 6 o'clock. And this is 6 o'clock.
You took my heart and ripped it apart. You made it hard, so hard for me to trust again.
Now we're moving into stage 3.
I never knew I could succeed until you started believing in me. To me, you're like a beautiful girl. Made me realize the true meaning of love. So take a bow, 'cause this is who you are. And I want you to see that this is who you are. I'm very birth like a phoenix rising from the ashes. I'm not old, but I'm new with butterfly wings. Humanity better watch out, 'cause I'm bringing something new. Loving me in
All right, so in that small 90-second, I think the whole album is about 35 minutes. Throughout that time, you go from one phase, and hopefully you heard the transformation and transitions just in that example. So just to let you know, after that concept album, I want to stand on its own. I think by engaging in that, you get to know that developmental phase. But because it was a dissertation and I needed to do more than that, what I did is I used that concept album and those 3 stages here as a way of organizing my later analysis. So the first stage, Songs That Protect Vulnerability, that's kind of the interpretivist themes that have come out of the song analysis, that there were 3 main developmental stages. There are songs that protected vulnerability, and the bottom are the original songs of abandonment and songs of faith and love, each representing different stages of development through trauma, each also representing different ways that I responded as a therapist, different ways the music was used, and it's too complex to go over right now. If you would like to read a 300-page plus dissertation and learn more, by all means, feel free to visit. But for me, it is the concept album that is the core of it. It's the arts-based research results that help me then organize later results. It's the arts-based research results, the concept album, for me, that holds the aesthetic knowledge that is so central to what we do as therapists. Okay. So I won't go into that. I do want to talk about one last thing about that study. If you go to michaelviega.com, you can actually engage with a lot of my scholarship here. But if you go to Rising from the Ashes, you could see a live remix right there. Once you watch it, if you'd like to take a survey of it, I'm kind of in a process of trying to understand audience reactions So please take the survey. That'd be awesome. But you could also get the whole dissertation here, so that if you would like to know more about it, you can engage with it here. All right. So once that was done, once the dissertation is done, I said, okay, right, I'm finished with this. But a couple years later, probably I was done with it in 2013, about 2014, 15, I started saying, no, I want to perform this. I want to perform these live improvisationally, and I want to perform them to an audience who would engage with them. Because I felt like I created this concept album, put it out there, but who's going to hear it? I want to know audiences' reactions. For me, that's really vital. That's important. Who has access to my dissertation? A handful of people might read it, you know. A handful of people might know how to respond to it. It only goes to kind of one particular audience, maybe. I wanted to perform it in all different types of audiences and gain reactions and have conversations. To me, this felt central. But it also embarked on a new research process doing that. I had to, for instance, when when we videotaped it here, I couldn't play some of the, some of them had samples of like a Lil Wayne song or a Jay-Z song, and I couldn't have that because of copyright issues. So sometimes I had to revisit some of the songs, and by doing so, I gained new information each and every time. By 2015, in the United States, Ferguson, the issue of police brutality was becoming very prevalent because of social media. There was, example after example of police brutality and the oppression of African Americans and Black Americans in the United States. And then we had the Black Lives Matter movement that began around 2014 and 15. And I began to realize as I was remixing, as I was kind of working on this for performance, that kind of cultural context for these songs was missing in my original analysis. I was thinking so much about their experience on an individual level, but I was not considering the collective societal oppression of minoritized groups in America, in which a lot of the participants and songwriters were, whether they know it or not, were a part of. And so I needed to find ways to express that. And so this becomes an important point, is that arts-based research is cyclical. It keeps giving you new information. You keep learning about it. And every performance I've done, every time I go into it, something new emerges. So I want to talk about that aspect of it here and give you some examples. So it actually came after this performance. What you'll see here is the only recorded performance, but it's also my first performance. I've now performed it about 6 or 7 times. And the last time I performed it was actually at a conference in England last week, and it was way more. What I've learned from this performing it is I needed to make it more participatory. Like I have audience interaction. It's not so much a performance. I've learned a ton about performing research results and what is needed. I won't go too much into that. That's not the purpose of it. But I do want to, I now have different samples that are a necessary part. So for instance, I have a sample.
I'm gonna let you know this. It is not about race. It is not about class. It is not about color. It is about what they killed him for. It is about poverty. It is about greed. And it is about a war machine. I'm gonna let you know this.
I have different samples that I've added. That is a sample of a rapper named Killer Mike, who the night in Ferguson, Missouri, when a prosecutor let off the police officer who murdered Michael Brown, there was riots in Ferguson, and that night a group called Run the Jewels with Killer Mike were playing, and Killer Mike gave this amazing, powerful, moving speech And so I sampled that at a key moment of, I sampled a quote from Tupac at one point as well. You know, there were these things, layers that I needed to add to it as I was performing. You know, when you watch this performance, it was the first one. I'm very stiff in terms of I'm not moving a lot. There's not a lot of audience participation. So I have, and those samples aren't there. So I think the most recent change that I want to share with you is that I'm beginning to realize, like I've been realizing that my whiteness, that my lens of being white, and the privilege that has been afforded to me through that, of both being a white therapist, of my social political privileges that I've had, and also how that my whiteness can, how it, as I start to create narratives, musical narratives of the lives of these songwriters, how my whiteness is very much, you know, part of that. It's part of that creative meaning making. And that decentering my whiteness has been something, and critically looking at how I've come up with this performance and these remixes have been central. So I've been recently kind of messing with that in terms of exploring that in the ways that I know how. So right at that 6 o'clock moment of the death and rebirth phase, when we get to that point, I pause and I take audio excerpts from a book called White Fragility, because I want myself and the audience to understand, okay, here we are at the death and rebirth, but now let's totally rethink how we're looking at all of this. Is this the experience of the songwriter, or is this my experience? How do I frame this moment? What does this what does this moment look like? And how can I decenter myself and my whiteness from this and engage with how this is actually creating this narrative? So I do want to apologize. This is actually from my latest performance of the piece, and the camera angle is horrible. I quickly recorded it and put the camera at an angle that is most unfortunate. But anyway, this is me right after a remix called Funeral Possession, exploring this topic of whiteness.
Keep the content comfortable.
So basically, it's saying if and when programs like this discuss racism, it really doesn't use terms like white, privileged, usually using terms like urban or at risk, which perpetuate racist imagery and racist notions. When a program like this addresses racism and perpetrating rights. Common responses include anger, guilt, cognitive dissonance. And so I'm playing with those terms, exploring those words. Argumentation. So you might not be able to hear it because I apologize if that was very poor sound quality. Let me go back to my keynote here. So anyway, that's the process. That's the cycle. I am continuously, every time I perform it, I bring new information that I want to explore into it. New current events that I feel like give me new information about the topics of hip hop, traumatized youth, songwriting, digital, electronic compositions. As I said, a lot of it has been taking the survey. Audiences take the survey and give me feedback. We have questions and answers. People take the survey, let me know. And what's important is that the survey responses have been, on one end of things, I love this. This has moved me to make a change in my life and the life of others. I went through my own hero's journey, which is great. It's great to hear. Good to get that feedback. But the feedback that has been really fascinating has been things like, I have no idea where the sounds were coming from. I was disturbed the whole time, and it made me want to leave. Now, having someone say that to a researcher, like a researcher might think, oh no, I got ones and that's not good research results. Or a musician might be like, oh, they hated me. But actually, when I threw away those egos aside, I said, right, that, number one, as an artist, I kind of want people to be viscerally upset in some ways. I like it when people get decentered. I like it when people don't know where something's coming from and it moves them. And at least you were moved in some way. And it tells me a lot about how people sit with the songs written by teenagers and the music of people who have experienced trauma. It's hard to sit in that music. It's hard to sit in those sounds. So the performance at times is abrasive. It's meant to be. So I am learning a lot at each stage of this research that has taken on many different facets and forms. Another aspect is aesthetics. Like this isn't meant to be performed like a hip hop concert or like a rave. It's not. It doesn't have those aesthetics. It has my therapeutic aesthetics. It has the involvement of the self in a different way. So all those things, aspects are there. All right, so let me go back to after that, I wanted to, I was, those songs from Rising from the Ashes, I was a part of. I was the therapist while those songs were being created. Like I said, I sometimes was the producer, I was the engineer, I was the fan, etc. Sometimes I was the co-creator. Well, I wanted a set of songs, access to songs that I didn't have any involvement in. So, because these songs, again, should be living, breathing artifacts, not just kind of something buried and left in a clinical note, but something that informs other people. I wanted access to songs that I didn't have involvement in, to see what I can learn about them as that outside listener. I actually did a set of songs from a music therapist in Korea who sent me songs. Unfortunately, we ended up not being able to use it, but I remixed and listened and analyzed those songs, and they were all in Korean. And when I would send back my remixes and my write-up, they were like, "Whoa, how did you know all this? How did you?" It was really fascinating to get their responses about, and they didn't give me a lot of context about how the songs were written, and yet I could pretty clearly tell what developmental phase they were in, and where they were at in the therapy, and where they were at in their trauma recovery, etc. So this is a group of songs from that Felicity Baker allowed me to have access to, from work being done, songs that were being created with people with neuro disabilities, from spinal cord injuries or traumatic brain injuries. And what these are songs that were written, a song of the past, a song of the present, and a song of the future. So each person had three songs that they had written. So I took all these songs, and going songwriter by songwriter, I began to remix and analyze their songs. There were 27, and there were 27 songs in total, written by 9 different patients. And what I began to do is I began to remix the songs and organize them in ways that ended up having 4 different kind of characters, 4 different composite characters at different stages of recovery from a spinal cord injury. And what you hear from these 4 songs are not just what you hear. Every sound you hear are sound samples, important samples from the original songs. And then what I did was over on top of the song, gave the narrative of where they were at in different phases. So actually, let me play for you. Let me get it out. So, oh, by the way, just you can actually, the pilot for this was published in a Nordic journal, where I piloted we looked at one song and piloted the study. And then in the Journal of Applied Arts and Health, Volume 8, is the publication of the larger set of songs. So what I love about this group of, what the pilot in this, is that it shows arts-based research concretely, and my methods section for both, especially this one, is as clear as can be. I wanted the art to be at the center of the method. And so for me, when you read arts-based research usually is under kind of the qualitative world, and the qualitative terminology gets used a lot. For me, I wanted the art to be centralized here. So I think this is one of the few examples of a very clear arts-based research method in music therapy. So for your own reading enjoyment, I won't go into the details. I did use what's called an MPC. I used one piece of equipment which sampled the songs. This is an example of the software. Okay, so here's an example of an original song. So that's just a brief clip of an original song. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to remix songs quickly, spontaneously, get an essence of what I was experiencing in a moment. So I did a lot of what I did in my first study, but I just kind of condensed it because I had such a large database of songs that I wanted to create a method of engagement that was really intuitive. And so this was my remix.
We all live in the same big town. 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 We all live in the same big town.
Just give you an example of my remix, which usually none were longer than a minute and a half. So I organized everything. I won't go in too much into detail about that. Structural collaboration is a key component of arts-based research, where you have all these various pieces of artistic data, and you got to create something that's whole. From that, you take the various sources and create something. It's like kind of creating a mural, right? You have all these little pieces of artistic data, but then when you create the mural, you can see it fully in that way. So my structural collaboration was to create this 4-song mini EP. And these 4 phases of treatment emerged. Phase 1 were this stage of treatment where people were kind of non-compliant, where they were hyper-focused on the past, and saw a little future. Stage 2 was accepting help. They were still stuck in the past, but began to realize that didn't really see a future, but began to realize, if I don't do something about this now, I have family that is gonna, I need to accept help. I need to move forward. Stage 3 was creative engagement. People who are actively engaged in treatment and finding new ways of kind of remixing their own identity towards the future. And then the last stage is transfiguration. Purposely use that term and not transformation. Transformation implies that I was something and now I'm something else. Transfiguration says I was always this, and this just happened to emerge. This is why the album is called My Curse is My Gift, because a lot of people in this stage said, I'm thankful for my accident. It showed me who I really am, which for me, right, that, and I want to just, because I'm getting towards the end, so I really just want to say that when I was analyzing and exploring these songs artistically, that the theme of this accident was a gift that showed me who I really am. That theme was not coded in Dr. Baker's and Felicity's qualitative research. You can't code that. There's no statistics that's going to find that. Yet that theme was coming out artistically for me in these songs, and I said, what do I do with that? It doesn't code to anything else, and yet it's there, and I think that's a vital piece of information. So arts-based research can be utilized to let complex, subtle social phenomenon come alive and be seen. And for me, this is the heart, especially of this piece. So again, all the sounds you hear, you're going to hear, and I'll just play little clips from the bookends. I'll play stage 1 and stage 4. Every sound you hear in this is going to be little pieces of original songs that were all fit under this category.
Everybody needs something from me. I just want to survive. You want me to get involved. used to be. With my mates carefree, living in a fog created by no one but me. It's all my fault. I'm in my early 20s. I'm in the hospital.
So themes of it's all my fault. I created this mess. I have to live with it. Living in my own fog. All these themes that were in those songs that get to come out through this research that, again, can't be coded and can't be found through statistics. I love both of these songs, but I'll go to the last one because the last one moves from, really moves from this stage right here is the big I. I feel like I can do this. I'm finding new ways, and this is the stage 4 is the big we. It's the we all live in the same big sky. So this is we're alive. This is the other end of the developmental spectrum.
I can feel the support underneath me, guiding me, lifting me up and from this height. I can see myself. I can see myself. I can see myself. I can see myself. And I can see myself. I can see myself. I can see myself walking. I'm alive. I'm alive. I'm alive. This world is a gift, showing me that there's a greater purpose to this. This world is a gift. This world is a gift, showing me there is a greater purpose to this. I can see myself. Your life is worth living. I can see myself. Despite my injuries, I can see myself. I will be the greatest me. This world has purpose. Never give up. This world has purpose. Never give up. I'm alive, and you're alive. We're alive.
So each one's meant to be quick, but yeah, you get the idea. So, part of art-based research is finding new media, to deliver and disseminate. So, I have things up on YouTube. I have everything is also up on SoundCloud, so you can engage with it here. I can get a sense of how many people have actually listened to it all the way through, which, I don't think these, more people know the Rising from the Ashes. Not a lot of people know these, but I love this group. This is kind of taking what was my dissertation and really making something out of it that could be useful in other aspects. So anyway, that's going to be it. I've talked long enough. I do want to say, if you're interested in remixing, let me know that, a lot of the remixes I had created, when possible, I've delivered them back. I remember that for these group of songs that some songs were delivered back to the patients of the hospital, songwriters at the hospital, when I was doing Rising from the Ashes. Every time I've shared a remix, the response back from the songwriter has been, wow, thank you. That's amazing that you took time to really move into the song. Again, remixing is about honoring the original content and living in it and recreating something new. That's the purpose of art, is, again, to experience it and want to create yourself. Yeah, I think that's it. Okay. Some concrete examples. I hope this helped. Use your artistry. Use your craft. Let the research come alive. Let the audience know who you are, what your craft is, and don't be afraid to break out of traditions and explore research in new ways. If you ever want support, let me know. I am here, and that is it. All right. Bye, everybody. Take care over there.